had certain philosophies of my own, and that was, number one, what I call the vertical game. We were going to stretch the field vertically. When we came out of the huddle, we weren't looking for first downs. We didn't want to move the chains. We wanted touchdowns. We wanted the big play, the quick strike. We're going to take what we want. That was Raider football. The defensive theory evolved early on in the 60s to, number one, pressure. Put pressure on the pocket, put pressure on the quarterback, diversification of defense, and the utilization of your corners in a bump and run principle. And the idea is to disrupt the offense, disrupt the flow of the offense, disrupt the continuity.
A different day throughout the National Football League because for the first time in 5 decades, we'll have a Sunday of football games without Al Davis being part of it. This is the scene in Houston where the Raiders just a short while ago are arriving to play their game, a very good game actually, against the Houston Texans. And a good morning to everybody. This is Sunday NFL Countdown, 3 hours right up until kickoff to get you ready for the day. I'm Chris Berman. To start things, we're going to shuffle it around a little bit at the outset because we've got some people that knew Mr. Davis, and certainly throughout the years and throughout the decades. And that would be Coach Mike Ditka, a fellow Hall of Famer. Good morning, Coach.
Good morning, Boom. How are you?
How are you?
Good. It's a good day.
Coach Bill Parcells, who will be and certainly goes back with Al Davis for sure. Thanks for joining us on this. And Tom Jackson, you played opposite the Raiders for many years, but there was an interesting sort of respect between you all.
Absolutely.
And thanks for doing this. Of course, Keyshawn Johnson and Chris Carter will be with us shortly, as will Chris Mortensen and Adam Schefter, Susie Kolber, Merrill Hodge, and the rest of our team here on Sunday NFL Countdown. Yesterday, the National Football League lost one of its most influential people ever when Al Davis passed away in his Bay Area home at the age of 82. You can use any number of words to describe this man who grew up in Brooklyn and in time helped the AFL grow up and become part of the NFL, and in time helped the NFL grow into the institution that brings us all together right now. Al Davis was a visionary. He was a renegade. He was an icon. He was all about football and held just about every job imaginable at every level. He was one of a kind.
Simply put, Al Davis was the Raiders. He was a rebel who stood defiantly alone and was the center of the silver and black universe that he created.
I am not one of the pack. Never have been, never will be. When I said I'd rather be feared than loved or respected, I meant as a team.
You were on the most feared team in the National Football League, and you knew that everyone in the league knew that you would do anything to win the game.
The phrase commitment to excellence was Davis's own. Those were the words he lived by.
I want the Raiders to leave a legacy as the greatest organization they've ever been.
In 1963, at the age of 33, Davis was named head coach of the struggling Oakland Raiders of the American Football League. The team had won only one game the year before, but in his first year, Davis led the Raiders to a 10-4 record, one of the greatest single-season turnarounds in pro football history. 3 years later, in 1966, Davis was hired as the AFL's commissioner.
I didn't want to be the commissioner, but some people said that our league was teetering, if that's the right word, and wasn't sure if they were going to be able to continue on.
His plan was to wage a battle against his NFL counterpart, Pete Rozelle. Davis opened negotiations with a dozen NFL veterans. The possible exodus of these players caused the NFL to take the AFL seriously. And in June of 1966, the two leagues agreed to merge.
I do know this, that we won the war, and they know it.
Davis returned to Oakland as the Raiders' managing general partner, but he and Rozelle would spar again when, in 1980, Davis tried to move the Raiders to Los Angeles without the commissioner's approval. 2 years of litigation followed, and Davis ultimately got his wish. He moved the Raiders to LA in 1982, only to return to Oakland after 13 seasons of disappointing profits.
I'm back before you again, and this time with guarded optimism to bring the Raiders back to Oakland.
Davis's Raiders may have been outsiders with a rebellious attitude, but they were also winners. Including the postseason between 1963 and 1985, Oakland won more games than any other team in pro football, 248. They reached 4 Super Bowls, winning 3 of them, living up to another famous Davis slogan, "Just win, baby."
A great football man. As good a football man as any owner in the history of this league.
Ever the rebel, Davis stretched the rules of society. He was instrumental in helping give opportunities to minorities in football. While an assistant coach at USC, it was Davis who recruited their first black quarterback, Willie Wood. With the Raiders, he was among the first to recruit from historically black colleges. In 1989, Davis hired former Raider Art Shell as head coach, making him the first African-American head coach in the modern era.
He helped mold this league. It's the way it is because of his thoughts and his disagreeing, like him or not. You have to respect him.
Davis was respected, but late in his career was also criticized for his all-controlling approach and questionable choices. He gave huge signing bonuses to players who produced very little. In an 8-year span between 2003 and 2010, he got rid of 5 head coaches, maintaining an iron-like grip on his team.
It hurts because I picked the guy. I picked the wrong guy.
He was determined in his pursuit of a return to the glory years of his franchise, even as critics were calling for him to step down.
We'll be back. The Raiders will be back.
Al Davis spent his life in football, playing every role: scout, assistant, head coach, general manager, and league commissioner. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1992.
It's praising myself, but I've done more than anyone else. Yeah, I've lived my dream, but I thought I would live my dream. I thought I would.
Al Davis, I mean, for those that didn't know all that, a man whose entire life was at every level in football, and you guys knew him well, fellow Hall of Famer.
Well, he's the reason we have one NFL. We wouldn't have. I can tell you, I was a player back in '66, and I was one of the players that the AFL went after. And they came to me with a pretty big contract. It was $100,000 a year with a $50,000 signing bonus. And when you're making $22,000, I would say that's a lot of money. They gave me the check for $50,000, and he said to me, well, no matter what happens, you're going to keep this check. Well, right after that, hey, everybody got together. I got 50 grand. Pretty good deal. Thanks, Al.
I met him I was still playing college football, and I met him in 1963 in Corpus Christi, Texas. He was the coach of the team. It was one of these games that you got paid $600 if you won the game and $400 if you lost the game. And during the course of the week, I was able to spend time with him in the lobby of the hotel at night talking football, and he was kind of surprised that I was interested in learning what he knew at that age. And unfortunately, during the week, I broke my hand in 3 places on a Wednesday. And, of course, there are no replacements available in those all-star games. You can't go get any. So he said, well, you going to play or not? So I said, yeah, I'm going to play. And then, strangely enough, after the game, he came up to me and he handed me an extra $200. And he said, thanks a lot. And that was the beginning of a 48-year friendship that existed until this week.
No, Coach, I got to know him uniquely as the enemy, one of those teams that realized they were the biggest and the baddest on the block. And in order for us to get where we needed to be, you had to beat Al Davis's Raiders. And what was always unique to me was the fact that the team, that silver and black, and the way they played was a reflection not of the head coach. It was always a reflection of him. And I think that the thing that always stood in my mind, and I couldn't stand it when I was playing, was that motto of pride and poise, the commitment to excellence, and then just win, baby. Those 3 things embodied, I think, you know, his philosophy of not only football, but his philosophy of life as well.
You know, Tommy, everybody thinks the Bears won the Super Bowl in 1985, and we did. But we really won it in '84. We won it in a game, and I believe it was early October. The Raiders came to town, and the Raiders were the bullies on the block. Yes. They were the king of the hill. And it was the most physical football game I've ever been. You saw the game.
Oh, yes.
They carried theirs off. They carried ours off. We won that football game, and then I knew that we had a chance to talk about. Well, we're up with the guys who can play. We can now play with the best. We arrived.
You guys will know it in different ways. I remember it was a Monday night game in the late 80s. I don't really recall where it was. And I happened to be down on the field with the Raiders, and the players were running off, half hour before the game after their final warm-up. And he turned to me, and he goes, "You know what, Chris?" And I do this with all reverence, the way he spoke. You heard it. His whole team just went by, and he looked at him like almost with love in his eyes. He goes, "I love players. Look at them, they're players." And then we, of course, he couldn't talk enough about the AFL in those days, knowing that was kind of my league as well, how I was weaned on football. And I'll give you another story, and it's an ESPN story. Now, this is early 80s. I'm a young guy. He's Al Davis. Early 80s, there's a Monday night game at the Silverdome, as a matter of fact, in Oakland, defending champs. LA actually kicked the Lions pretty good. And we're talking afterwards. He goes, "I root for ESPN. You know why?" And we were in business 4 years, maybe. "Because you're the underdog."
Yeah.
Just like that. "Because I root for the underdog." And if there was a fight to have, Al would lead it.
Go on.
I'll tell you one thing he did for me. My first year as a head coach with the Giants, my job was in question. It was being threatened. Job security wasn't good. And he was able to give me a perspective of the general manager and the owner, and I, as a young coach, didn't have that perspective. And the advice that he gave me, and I've passed this on to countless number of people in this profession that I've been involved with, was just do your job. It's the only thing you can control. Just do your job.
I'm going to tell people a story. I hope they'll enjoy it. It kind of embodies Al Davis. When I finished playing professional football, one of my first assignments the next year as training camp started was to go to Raider camp and cover it. I fly out to LA, I get out there, and the night before, about 11 o'clock, I get a call from the Raider organization saying, "You can't come out here and cover the team tomorrow." And I was like, well, why? They go, "Well, because Al is not comfortable with you seeing the Raiders practice, having been a Denver Bronco for so long." I decide to take the camera crew out there anyway. The next day, I am literally sitting on the curb with the camera crew, and Al comes through. And he calls me over, and he goes, "Come on over, son." He goes, "Come here." And he put his arm around me, and he goes, "I don't want you to feel real bad." He goes, "You just been a Bronco, though, for 14 years. I'm just not comfortable with you seeing a Raider practice." And I said, "Al, I would never take information from the Raiders and take it back to the Denver Broncos." I said, it would ruin my career in TV. And he goes, "If you were a Raider and you had a chance to see a Bronco practice and find out some things," he goes, "I'd expect you to come back and tell me everything you know." And it was just one of those moments where I thought, now that embodies a guy and everything that he believes about his organization and what he wants them to be.
Well, we're going to have a lot more remembrances from us and from those around the league, and certainly many of the Raiders that knew him better than anybody else. A very sad Sunday, of course, of the National Football League, as one of the most important figures in the history of the game has left us. Our deepest sympathies go out to his wife, Carol, and the entire Davis family, and, of course, the Raider family as well. Al Davis, dead at the age of 82. Head coach Hugh Jackson leading the Raiders into Houston a short while ago. A lot on their minds for sure. Plenty more on the passing of Al Davis, and certainly someone on our ESPN team that knew Al Davis quite well, Coach John Gruden, a young man that Al took a chance on to be his head coach. We know that he is forever grateful. Coach Gruden is with Mike Tirico. Mike?
John, for you, you were 34 years old, very young for a head coach, and Al Davis hires you. It had to be a unique moment in your career and a great opportunity.
Yeah, I'll always be forever thankful for the opportunity that he gave me. I interviewed for the job about 7 times, but only Al Davis would have taken a chance on an unknown like me. And that was, I think, one of the things that really made him unique and special is he had no fear, and he was willing to take risks, even on a guy like me where he probably wasn't right.
And you talk about your experiences, and there's a whole generation that doesn't remember and is being reminded over the last couple of days. Al Davis was a head coach. He was a coach of the year and always kept his on-the-field knowledge of football as a presence with the Raiders, and you experienced that drafts and just even watching games week to week.
Did I ever experience it? You know, he's one of the few guys that could come in your office and draw up a punt protection. He could draw up cover 2 beaters. He could draw up a goal line front. He knew everybody in the league that played pro football. He knew the coaches. He knew the players. He was on top of all the personnel people. He had an unbelievable football mind, and that's really what he did every day of his life. Try to make the Oakland Raiders better. And I became a lot better coach fast just by being around that atmosphere.
And the legacy, too. The legacy's in so many different ways. The unique appearance of Al Davis. He always knew everything about the Raiders. But what struck me, we were in the Bay Area to do a game a couple of years ago, and you got together with a bunch of Raiders. And it's the only NFL franchise that really has that college alumni feel to the people who worked for Al Davis, played for Al Davis, and wore the silver and black.
Well, he pointed it out to me the very first day I worked there. He says, close your eyes and think of silver and black. And what do you think of? You think of the Oakland Raiders. It's a global franchise. It's got a tremendous tradition of greatness. And some of the players, you saw the names, some of the guys that were on our sidelines. What a man, Al Davis. He was special.
Thanks. Guys, back to you.
Coach, Mike, thank you very much. Well, I mean, here it is. The Raiders since 1963 when Al came over after being an assistant under Sid Gilman with the Chargers. Third in wins. I mean, see everything. Postseason wins, division titles. Only the Cowboys and the Steelers since 1963 have won more regular season games. This, of course, it doesn't even go into the 3 Super Bowl titles in 76, 80, and 83, so 3 and 8 years. The resume of just winning, baby. Impressive enough as we continue to talk about the passing of a football icon, Al Davis.
A guy where you felt like you could go to him and talk about your problems, and a lot of people did.
Now, there are a lot of people hate him in the NFL because he's beating them in the courts and he's beating them on the field, but he is extremely gracious and great to all his ex-players.
If you wore that silver and black in Al Davis book, you were a part of him and you were family.
I think every player, whether he admits it or not, towards the twilight of his career, wants to go play for the Raiders.
Well, Al Davis passing away yesterday at his Bay Area home at the age of 82. His Raiders were always a different entity, that's for sure. And Hugh Jackson is their head coach as the Raiders are in Houston to an early kickoff to play the Texans. Hugh was kind enough to visit with our Bob Holtzman.
Hugh, you guys spent a lot of time together at the team hotel yesterday. How would you describe the emotions of this team right now?
Good. I think we're ready to play. I think we understand the significance of what happened yesterday, but I think we also understand we have a game to play.
What do you plan to say to your team before this game kicks off?
I'd probably say just what Coach would say, just win, baby.
How do you expect, what kind of effort do you expect from your team today?
I expect a great effort. I expect to go win the game. I mean, that's what we're here for. I think our players understand that we've been built this way, you know, from head to toe. I think our guys understand how we put this team together in Coach's vision and what his expectations are of this football team. And we're not going to back off of that, not one bit.
I understand Al's son, Mark Davis, is here with the team today. What, if any, impact do you think that will have?
Tremendous impact. He's at every game, and we're glad to have him here. We want to represent him and his dad the right way, and we're going to go out and play Raider football.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very nice of Coach Jackson to join us there. And speaking about Raider football, a gentleman that certainly knew how to do it. He caught over 1,000 passes for the Silver and Black, and that would be Tim Brown, who joins us now live from the area where he lives now in Dallas. And Tim, first of all, our condolences to you and all the Raider family. What was it like to see and interact with Al Davis, the owner, if you will, or managing general partner, on a daily basis? I mean, you're a player. He's, quote, upstairs every day you saw him. What was that like?
Well, he wasn't upstairs. He was on the field with us, and that was a great thing about Al. You know, you never had to worry about wondering where your owner was. He was always on the field, and I think that's the one thing the guys of the last 4 or 5 years have missed the fact that he hasn't been at practice and he hasn't been that presence on the field like he was with us. And, you know, it was awesome. I mean, I knew no other thing because, you know, that was the only team I played for. But from what I hear, you know, other teams don't get that luxury of having their owner on the field on a day-to-day basis.
Well, no, most owners weren't coaches, et cetera. What did he teach you, Tim? You know, you have a head coach, you have position coach, et cetera. What did he teach you about football, both in the passing game and about being a professional player?
Well, you know, I think he taught me patience. You know, I think, you know, when you come out of college, you know, you have a Heisman Trophy under your arm, and you think you can do all these great things. You know, he automatically or initially told me, hey, look, I think you're going to be the best third down punt returner to ever play this game. And I'm looking, I'm going, what are you talking about? You know, that's not my goal here. I'm trying to be one of the best receivers ever play this game. But I think he had a goal for me that maybe I didn't see for myself. And once I was injured early in my career, you know, I sort of bought into his plan because at that particular time, I was only playing on third downs when I was returning punts. But things changed for me a little later on in my career, and I was able to go out and play a lot more receiver. But, you know, he used to always say about me also, and the thing that really motivated me, that he loved when I had a bad play or I had a bad game because he knew that I was going to come out the next play or the next game and do something great. And so that was something that I think that was his backhanded way of motivating me when I had a bad game or a bad play. But it certainly worked for me throughout my career.
Tim, he was always the coach, as you know better than us. What was it like to wear the silver and black for Al Davis?
Well, you know, no matter where you went, you had tons of fans. Raider Nation was everywhere. But you were hated also. And I think for us, I mean, obviously we didn't win 5 championships during my 16 years with the Raiders, but we played in a lot of great games and emotionally and physically tough games. And it was just always great to know that you're going to have fans in every city that you went to, especially on the East Coast, and obviously back on the West Coast. But to know that you were hated just when the silver and black came out, the boos and the things that were thrown at you and all those kind of things, I think sort of motivated the players to go out and just try and play a little harder, just to prove the people right or wrong. Just depends on their perspective of the Raiders at the time.
And probably nobody liked those boos on the road better than Al Davis, right?
Well, you know, and he loved it. I mean, this guy would every road game he went on, he would go stand on the opposing team's bench, and while they came out to warm up, he would be standing right there, forcing the players to run around him. He was a menace to a lot of folks, I'm sure, but it was his way of doing things. And you know, the great thing about Al, no matter if you loved him or hated him, he didn't care. He was going to do things his way. And I think that's the special thing about him. You know, a lot of people would have changed or tried to, you know, fit into society. But I think Al wanted to do things his way, and that's what he did, and he did it great.
He did, Tim. I know that you and all your teammates, even those you didn't play with, the long legacy of the Raiders are feeling the hurt this week. And thanks for sharing some time with us this morning. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Boone. Appreciate you.
All right, Timmy. Very, very good player, obviously. Over 1,000 catches. We can go on and on and on. And so many Raiders. You just think of Al Davis. I mean, that is the Raiders. And he's like a walking history lesson in professional football. You will not, Morton Adam, think about the Raiders 30, 40, 50 years from now without thinking about Al Davis. Now where do we move on?
Boomer, that's exactly right. And even when I started covering the league well over a quarter of a century ago, I was amazed at how many people outside the Raiders referred to Al Davis on things they learned. You know, there's a new popular phrase called bigger, faster, stronger. That was always Al Davis. I mean, he built his teams with big tackles, with corners that could cover, with speed that, as he said, would strike fear and intimidate you. He loved collecting what you could call trophies, Heisman Trophy winners, guys like Tim Brown, guys like Charles Woodson, Bo Jackson. No mistake that Darren McFadden, by the way, even though he wasn't a Heisman winner, runner-up twice, has that speed. And he wasn't afraid, as Tim Brown said, to do the unpopular. He made Ray Guy a first-round draft pick, a punter, and he made Sebastian Janikowski a kicker, a first-round punter, and he didn't need the Rooney Rule to do the right thing when it comes to hiring minorities and others.
And there was a soft side to him as well. Last week, before the Raiders played the Patriots, Al Davis approached Patriots owner Robert Kraft and told him that the Raiders plan to have a moment of silence before the game to honor his late wife, Myra Kraft. And then in turn, the league yesterday sent out a memo to all the teams hosting games this weekend. And across the league today, every home team will have a moment of silence for the late, great Al Davis. Boom.
As they should. Thanks, fellas. Everybody, it is with heavy hearts and presumably a strong sense of purpose that the 2-2 Oakland Raiders take the field today at 3-1 Houston. While the Silver and Black thinks of the passing of Al Davis, on the field they think of scoring, which they've done very well. They've scored 111 points in 4 games. That's 4 more than a team that's known for high scoring, the Houston Texans. Houston may have had their long-awaited signature win last week, 17-10 over Pittsburgh in a game that wasn't nearly that close. Can they use that win as a springboard, although they move forward for a while without stud wide receiver Andre Johnson? It's a matchup of last year's rushing leader, Houston's Arian Foster, against this year's leader thus far, Oakland's Darren McFadden. To Reliant Stadium and Bob Holtzman. Bob?
Well, Chris, on the back of the Raiders' helmets today, a subtle tribute to the man who built this franchise, and you're not going to see anything more than subtle from the Raiders today. There was no win one for the Gipper speech last night. Hugh Jackson knows that his players are creatures of habit. He did not change the normal schedule, trying to minimize distractions. Instead, they will try and focus on their play today to try and honor Al Davis. Defensive end Richard Seymour told me there were times over the past couple of years that he would run into Davis in the weight room, even though there were days that Davis could barely walk. Seymour said, that's who we're playing for today. Chris, if there was ever a day for the just win baby slogan, that's how the Raiders are approaching today.
Well, Bob, no question, and I think back to when the Giants, Wellington Mara, their beloved owner, passed away, and I think of that performance they had. I know they were at home, but it was a divisional foe, Washington. They clobbered the Washington Redskins, and it was a game for Mr. Mara. I just wonder what we're going to see out of the Raiders today. Houston had better be ready.
The autumn wind is a pirate, blustering in from sea. With a rollicking song, he sweeps along, swaggering boisterously. His face is weather-beaten. He wears a hooded sash with a silver hat about his head and a bristling black mustache. He growls as he storms the country, a villain big and bold, and the trees all shake and quiver and quake as he robs them of their gold. The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won.
Interesting as you watch that great piece from NFL Films, and John Facenda. Al Davis's image was not in that vignette, but it really didn't need to be. Everybody knows there was only one man who could say that he created it and he lived it. Here's Steve Sable.
Born on the 4th of July, 1929, Al Davis was an All-American original. Known as a maverick, Davis was also savvy. At the age of 36, Davis was named commissioner of the AFL, and his backroom acumen helped facilitate the merger between the rival NFL and the AFL. Davis loved the game of football more than the business of football. Always on the lookout for new talent, Davis's keen eye helped salvage countless careers, including Super Bowl MVP Jim Plunkett. In fact, Davis has presented 9 men for induction into the Hall of Fame, more than anyone else. Davis defies easy classification because he was an original. Scout, coach, commissioner, and owner, Davis took a path unlike anyone before. Though a complex man, his motivation was perfectly simple.
The fire that burned brightest in me and the fire that burns brightest in this organization is the will to win.
The poet William Butler Yeats wrote that there was one myth for every man, which, if we knew it, would make us understand all that he did and thought. Al Davis's myth was the Raiders. He created their mystique and burnished their aura until they became unlike anything in football. Authors of The Impossible, the Silver and Black's library of fantastic finishes include many of the game's greatest plays.
Here comes the rush. He sidesteps. Can he throw? He can't. The ball flipped forward is loose. A wild scramble. 2 seconds on the clock. Casper grabbing the ball. It is ruled a fumble. Casper has recovered in the end zone. The Oakland Raiders have scored on the most zany, unbelievable, absolutely impossible dream of a play.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's not. He throws. It is.
Davis loved pro football. And for a man impossible to define, 3 little words will have to suffice.
Just win, baby.
And they certainly did a lot of that. The Raiders released a statement, and this is a statement in part. Al Davis was a champion of diversity who maintained the courage of his convictions. His passion for the game we all love is best exemplified by his famous phrase, commitment to excellence. The fire that burns brightest in the Raider organization, the will to win, will continue to blaze through the legacy of the great Al Davis. And now we go back out west again. Certainly a gentleman, one of our compatriots here for years, has shared the Bay Area, if you will, with the Niners and the Raiders, and shares a place in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and that would be quarterback Steve Young. And Steve, good morning. Thanks for spending time with us. Al Davis, although from afar, what did he mean to you for the game of football, the big picture?
Well, you know, and it's never that far. When you're in the Bay Area, it was always Raiders, 49ers, and they had different times when they peaked, and I think for particular reasons. But Mr. Davis was somebody that, you know, Lee Steinberg, a great agent, who was my agent in Berkeley, California, used to say that he used to get calls from Al Davis all night. You know, they'd get on the phone at 10 a.m. and they'd talk till 4 a.m. talking about all the different players. And what I learned about Al Davis is that he coveted athletes. He loved speed and athletic ability more than, you know, and his touch for, you know, understanding who could match with his team. He always talked about matchups, Boomer. You know, football's matchups, you know, and so we always heard that statement come from him. And so he looked for those matchups when it was man to man. He wanted his Raider bottle of athleticism, he wanted to fill up higher and bigger than any other team, and then he figured he would win. And for the 60s and 70s, that was the case.
Well, you know your offensive football so well. And, of course, the 49ers and Coach Walsh moving forward did it in a certain way and did it as well as anybody. But yet the Raiders, I mean, and Al came from Sid Gilman, a few years as coach with the L.A. and San Diego Chargers before he went to Oakland in '63. So this vertical game, this passing, you've studied it. What was it about the passing game that Al Davis coveted and knew so well?
He was big on protection, deep drops, long routes, and then having people just more speed. If I'm faster than you, I'm going to win. If I can throw that deep in, that deep comeback, that deep post, change the game. I mean, yeah, third and 8. Well, we're going to go 3rd and 30. We're going to try to spread this team deeper. Now, Bill Walsh tried to take it sideline to sideline and change the game dramatically in the 80s, where it was more tactics and more timing. And it really wasn't about just filling up with just pure athletes. It was about finding that right combination of speed and intellect and other kinds of things, where I think that the game changed there and changed for the Raiders. And so for many years, the Raiders were behind as the West Coast offense took shape. And then I think Al Davis finally said, look, you know what, I'm tired of batting my head against the stone here. I'm going to turn to the West Coast, hire John Gruden, bring in Jerry Rice, have Rich Gannon, kind of a West Coast quarterback, and then they went to the Super Bowl that way. So I thought he was a great adapter, too, as he watched the game change.
Steve, and you could speak to this even long before you played professional or even college football as a young man growing up a coast away from the Raiders. But we all knew, even in the Northeast, you watch the Oakland Raiders, Al Davis's Oakland Raiders, what they stood for and what they still stand. What do you think of when you think the Raiders?
Well, that's what's so amazing. You know, Boomer, you think about in this league, how many guys join a team and it's meaningful, like we know what a Raider is? Well, I think there's a couple teams at this point. If you join the Patriots, you know what a Patriot is. But there's not many that have that identity. That the Steelers, you know what a Steeler is. There's a few teams that use that, and I think through the years carry them, year to year, so they have something to build on, where a lot of teams just don't have that. The Raiders have had that for 40 years. When you show up with the Raiders, you know what you're expected to be, and that to me is, we're going to be, nothing matters other than you better win, and you better play hard, and you better play with a flair. I mean, I think all of us kind of wonder, what would we be like as Raiders? Sometimes it was, you think, well, Steve Young can't be a Raider. I actually thought I would be a great Raider. I think a lot of athletes thought it would be fun to play for Al Davis.
Yeah, and he would have thought it would be fun to have you. Steve, speaking globally football, what will you miss the most now that Al Davis has passed away? What will you miss the most about not having him
I think, Boomer, he was just, people always say, I'm competitive, or he was so competitive, or, he had passion. But there's difference. It's like Jerry Rice was on earlier in the show, and there's work ethics, and there's Jerry Rice work ethic. It's just different. Well, the passion for football, I think, was different with Al Davis than other people in the league who you thought, everyone has passion. He had it kind of heightened in a bigger way. And so whenever you were around him, I'd run into him in the stadiums, in the locker rooms, or on the field, or when we played him, and you just had a sense that he loved football more than anybody else. And I think that's what I'll miss, is that the guy that you could point to and say, that man loves the game and has proven it over many, many years.
Well, eloquent as always, Steve. Thanks very much for joining us this morning, and we all will miss Al Davis. He loved the game of football. Thanks.
He sure did. Thanks, Boomer.